Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. So glad you're joining us today. We're going to dive right into a topic that is fascinating, highly debated, and honestly, pretty controversial: water fluoridation. As focused learners, I know you want to cut straight through all that noise and look directly at the actual facts. Well, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're putting the absolute highest quality, most current scientific data under the microscope, totally impartially, to see what it really tells us. All right, let's just dive straight in. Is the water from your tap safe for your brain? You know, it's a question that's probably crossed your mind recently. I mean, we've all seen those really frightening headlines circulating on social media and in the news, suggesting this huge link between fluoride in drinking water and negative neurodevelopmental impacts in kids. It sounds terrifying, right? Totally. But, as always, we've got to ask ourselves, are these headlines actually reflecting the best available science? Well, let's find out. Okay, so here's our quick roadmap for The Explainer today. First, we'll look at the water fluoridation debate. Second, the IQ question. Third, evidence from meta-analyses. Fourth, the Australian IQ study. Fifth, health and equity benefits. And finally, the scientific consensus. All right, Section 1, the water fluoridation debate. Let's quickly establish exactly what it is we're investigating today. Let's establish our baseline here. Community water fluoridation, or CWF, is the controlled adjustment of naturally occurring fluoride in public drinking water, basically just to prevent tooth decay. Historically, this has been hailed as literally one of the major public health achievements of the 20th century. But, like any widespread public health intervention, it requires ongoing, really rigorous safety reviews as our scientific tools improve. We just can't rest on historical assumptions, right? We need modern data. And really, that brings us right to the core of the whole concern. The precautionary principle. Basically, does early exposure to fluoride risk the developing human brain? The developing human brain is highly susceptible to chemicals, and those major windows of vulnerability, they happen during infancy and early childhood. So asking if early exposure poses a risk isn't just some fringe question, it's a completely valid scientific inquiry. It's exactly what prompts the need for the rigorous data we're about to review. Moving on to Section 2, the IQ question. Let's look directly at the specific core of the modern controversy, which is the claim that fluoride drops children's intelligence scores. Now, there is a totally crucial distinction that constantly gets lost in those scary headlines: the difference between endemic high fluoride areas and community water fluoridation. So much of the data showing negative IQ effects actually comes from endemic high fluoride areas. We're talking about places in countries like China, India, or Iran, where fluoride occurs naturally at incredibly high, totally unregulated levels, very often in impoverished rural communities. You literally cannot scientifically conflate those extreme conditions with community water fluoridation in developed nations, where fluoride is artificially maintained at very low, highly controlled, and incredibly closely monitored levels. Understanding this distinction is absolutely paramount to understanding the actual data. Okay. Section 3, evidence from meta-analyses. With that distinction perfectly clear, let's look at the highest level of scientific evidence out there. We are going to examine a major 2023 review by Kumar and colleagues. To find the truth, these researchers systematically stripped away all the noise. So instead of looking at those unregulated, naturally high fluoride regions, they synthesized 8 observational studies that focused strictly on non-endemic areas. Basically, they wanted to see what happens to children exposed specifically to the recommended lower levels of fluoride that you'd find in standard community water fluoridation. They even adjusted for factors like maternal exposure just to ensure the data was as clean and relevant as it could possibly be. And here is the absolutely crucial point: the result, 0.07. That is the standardized mean difference in IQ scores they found. Put simply, in statistical terms, this means there was absolutely no statistically significant difference in children's IQ scores based on exposure to community water fluoridation. None whatsoever. When you actually look at the right populations, at the right dosages, that supposed cognitive drop, it simply does not appear in the synthesized data. Which brings us to Section 4, the Australian IQ study. Let's see how this builds with an incredibly specific, population-based, longitudinal study published very recently, in 2024, by researchers in Australia. This study gives us incredibly robust, long-term tracking, and the methodology here is just amazingly thorough. First, researchers calculated the precise lifetime exposure to fluoridated water for children from birth up to 5 years old. Second, dental examiners checked for clinical dental fluorosis, which actually acts as a really objective biological marker of total early life fluoride intake. And third, And guys, this is the real kicker. They waited until these kids grew up. At ages 16 to 26, they administered the WAIS IV, which is literally the absolute gold standard intelligence test. They tracked them for over a decade to get these answers. So, what happened? Well, when we look at the results, the group with absolutely zero exposure to fluoridated water during their first 5 years scored an average WAIS IV IQ of 108.6. The group with 100% exposure, they scored 109.1. So the 100% exposed group actually scored a tiny fraction higher. Now, statistically speaking, researchers conducted strict equivalence tests and found that these scores are entirely functionally equivalent. Let me actually just read this decisive conclusion straight from the Australian study's authors. The study provided consistent evidence that early childhood exposure to fluoride does not have effects on cognitive neurodevelopment. This objective, super high-quality, long-term data effectively neutralizes that whole fear of IQ drops at community fluoridation levels. It's such a powerful testament to exactly why we absolutely must rely on rigorous longitudinal studies over, alarming internet rumors. Let's transition to Section 5, Health and Equity Benefits. Having addressed the neurodevelopment controversy, you might be wondering, if the data shows it isn't harming us, why exactly are we doing it? Let's look at the verifiable public health outcomes. To really ground this, we're looking at the official 2024 evidence review published by the New Zealand Ministry of Health. This represents current, top-tier governmental public health policy analysis. They reviewed all the global data to update their stance on CWF. And honestly, their findings are striking. First off, CFW actively and effectively prevents dental caries or tooth decay. But the second point is arguably the absolute most important from a public health perspective. It actively promotes equity. It decreases tooth decay in highly deprived socioeconomic areas just as effectively as it does in wealthier ones. It truly levels the playing field for kids who might not have access to regular dental care. Furthermore, the review confirms it is completely safe at CFW levels, noting that the only real risk is mild dental fluorosis. And that just presents as faint white spots on teeth. It's primarily a cosmetic issue, not a health concern at all. Finally, Section 6, the scientific consensus. Let's bring all the puzzle pieces of our scientific investigation together for a final objective synthesis. This quote from the 2024 New Zealand Review perfectly captures the consensus right now. I'll read it directly for us. CWF is a safe and effective public health intervention to prevent dental caries. There has been no high-quality evidence to suggest a causal link between fluoride exposure at the levels used and significant harm to health. Bottom line, when we strip away the noise, when we look at the appropriate exposure levels, and when we analyze gold standard longitudinal data, the balance of evidence heavily and consistently supports both the safety and the efficacy of community water fluoridation. Which leaves us here. We started this explainer by asking if the water is safe for your brain. And the high-quality data we've explored today points really clearly to yes. But, science is never entirely settled, right? It's always an ongoing process of refinement. So my question to you to take away today is this. How will ongoing, rigorous data reviews continue to shape our most vital public health policies in the future? We absolutely must constantly reevaluate scientific evidence to protect both our bodies and our minds. But we've got to let the objective data lead the way. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.